sewing room today, and I'll be making this double 9-patch quilt block. When I square it up today, I'll square it up to 12.5 inches, and it will finish in your quilt at 12 inches when sewn into the quilt. Now this particular block is a little bit more common as a 9-inch quilt block, but I'll show you a pretty easy technique for the 12 inches. So let's get started. I'll show you how to make it. You can see there's 9 patches creating the 9-patch quilt block, and then within the 9-patch quilt block is this block, which is also made out of 9 patches. So hence the name double 9-patch quilt block. You'll need to choose a light and a dark fabric. From the dark fabric, cut 3 strips 1 7/8 of an inch wide by 22 inches long. From the light fabric, cut the same exact thing, 3 strips, 1 7/8 of an inch by 22 inches. And then in addition, with your light fabric, cut 4 4.5-inch squares. And I did want to mention on the 22 inches, that can be approximate. I'm using my fat quarters today, and so they measure just about 22 inches, but not exactly. Now you'll make 2 separate strip sets. One will have the light fabrics on the outside with the dark in the middle. And the second set will be just the opposite. Darks on the outside and the light fabric in the center. I'll flip right sides together, here and here. I'll take these to the machine. I'll sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance right along here and right along here, and then I'll add the 3rd strip to each set. I have my 1/4 inch presser foot. I have a leader fabric here so my bobbin thread doesn't bunch up on the back of my strip set. And I'm beginning to sew at the selvage. And I don't pin these together, I just kind of hold the bottom one tight, and then I adjust the top to match. I'll trim off the leader fabric. And the reason I like to start at the selvage edge is so I can keep track of which direction I'm sewing. Because I've mentioned this on another video, but I'll go ahead and match up these ends like so. But instead of beginning to sew here, I'll actually start sewing on the other end. I'll begin sewing down here. And that way it helps to keep the strip set from bowing out of shape too much. Again, a 1/4 inch right down here. There's my first strip set. Off camera, I will sew the other strip set together with my 2 dark fabrics on the outside and my light fabric in the center. And I'll press toward my dark fabrics. That means from this side, after I set my seam, I would finger press toward the dark and press. And you can absolutely press that way. I tend to, on these strip sets, I like to press from the back, like so. And with my second strip set, I'll do the same thing. I'll be pressing toward my dark fabric. So from the back it looks like this. And if you wanted to do that from the front, you would just give it a finger press. And again, press toward the dark fabric. I'll flip it around. And from this strip set, you'll cut 10 segments at 1 7/8 of an inch wide. So the easiest thing I like to do, it's kind of an awkward number, an awkward measurement. So I start at 2. I line on my ruler with the bottom of my strip set, and then I just go to 2 and then back down to my first mark, which is it's very little if you can see it. On this particular ruler, it's right here, little black dot. And I'll cut 10 of these segments. And from your second strip set with the lighter fabrics on the outside, I just evened off the edge. The same thing, but this time you only need 5 segments. So again, line it up along the bottom. And at my 7/8 of an inch, 1 7/8 of an inch line. And I'll cut 5 of those strips. Now I'll arrange these to create our mini 9 patches. So you take 2 of the segments with the dark and place the lighter colored fabric on the edges in the center like so. Now that I have my 5 mini 9 patches laid out, I'll sew them together. So you simply right sides together. And because of pressing toward the dark, you'll have 1 seam allowance going in this direction, 1 going the other. And you'll just match up those seams. And a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance right here, and I'll repeat that on all of my blocks. I like to stack up my strips right next to my sewing machine. And since these are such small units, I won't pin or glue. I will just use my stiletto to help me keep my seams lined up. And I just check as I sew, get them all lined up, and then I just kind of hold it there with my stiletto. You can use your fingers as well. And same thing with my next. Line it up. And then line up my ends. And I'll feed these right through. Now I'll add my 3rd side to each of my mini 9 patches, right sides together. Off camera, I'll sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance right along here. And I'll set my seam and finger press. And I'm pressing toward the outside, toward this strip with the 2 dark fabrics. I'll repeat that on the other. Finger press and press. And I'll repeat that on my other 4 patches. At this point, each of these blocks is oversized, so I'll need to trim it down, and I'll use my Quilt in a Day ruler that I use all the time. The first thing I'll need to do is find the center of my patch here, so I'll just fold it in half, and I'll use my seam roller. This is one by Violet Craft, and I'll just roll it so I can see a crease right here. And I only need to do that on the top and the side, one side. So I'll repeat that. Now that I have those crease marks, I'll use my square up ruler and I'll line up my 2 1/4 inch mark on my crease line here and on the side. Because we're squaring up this to 4 1/2 inches, the center, of course, is 2 1/4. So here is my 2 1/4 inch mark here and my 2 1/4 inch mark here. So I'll trim this side and across the top. Now I'll flip the block completely upside down and I'll trim up the remaining 2 sides. At this point, I'll put my ruler here and here exactly at 4 1/2 inches. So I have 4 1/2 inches here and here, and I'll trim this side across the top, and that'll give me an exact 4 1/2 inch square, and I'll repeat that on my other 4 patches. Now that these are all squared up, I'll arrange the patches in their places to get ready to sew them all together. And I'll do this row first, and again, right sides together. Quarter inch seam allowance down each of these edges. And I'll feed the next one right in. Now that these are sewn together, you'll place these right sides. Off camera, I will sew, and I meant to say earlier, you get better results if you use a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'll sew that here, here, and here. And to press, before I join these 3 rows together, I'll press toward my plain 4 1/2 inch square. So the center here, the seam allowance is going this direction. And I'll set my seam. And this time I will press toward my 4 1/2 inch square. Okay, and I'll repeat that on this strip here, and that way you can see there will be one seam allowance going this direction and one going this direction, so it'll make it really simple to join these rows together. And I make sure that the rows are in their correct positions, right sides together. And I'll need to match up this seam and this seam, and at this point I will use my glue stick. It's a sew line glue stick, and I'll just put a little dab right there and right there. I'll match up the seams and pinch. I'll take it to the machine. Again, a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance right along here. And I'll make sure I match up my ends. And I'll open that up, see how my seams match, they look good. And then again, this strip, same thing, right sides together. And off camera, I'll sew a scant 1/4 inch seam right along here, matching up my seams and gluing them just like I did down here. And a final press. And the final measure looks really good, 12.5 inches square. There you have it, the double 9-patch quilt block. It's a classic block, very versatile, perfect for many quilts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.